piece of shit! Alright now, get out there and make me some goddamn money!
Pixar's 27th feature film Elemental is out, and it's not doing too hot, which is a crazy thing to think about because it feels like just yesterday many people would argue that Pixar was not only the best animation studio around, but arguably the best studio period in the entire industry. Not only were their films loved by both critics and audiences for over 15 years, they were great at making a shit ton of money. So when you look at the box office numbers for Elemental, you might be wondering, how did we get here? The lowest opening weekend to a theatrical release that the studio has ever had. Many have argued that Pixar has suffered a huge dip in quality over the second half of its existence, and we'll definitely talk about that in a second. But if you were to check Rotten Tomatoes, the only film you would find that is not rated fresh is Cars 2, which is insane considering this one was way worse. And even though Rotten Tomatoes is not how I determine whether a movie is good or not, go follow me on the best film related site, baby. It does give a pretty good estimate though for how many people give a movie the thumbs up or the thumbs down. So if people are still enjoying their movies, there has to be more to this story than just saying, well, the movies just aren't good anymore. I went out to the theater to see Elemental, and I thought it was actually very well done for the story they were telling. Peter San, who directed this one and voiced that cat from Lightyear, did an excellent job at retelling his own family's immigrant story with animation that was beautiful, jokes that were funny enough, and those emotional moments that Pixar is known for. My girlfriend cried 6 times, and my theater was pretty full because I live 5 minutes from Disney World, so maybe a Disney crowd inflated my experience a little bit, but there wasn't a dry eye in the theater multiple times. But if critics and audiences are overall having a good time with this one, and even I had a good time with this one, what is the problem? After sitting down and thinking about it, I don't think there is a problem, but rather 4 massive obstacles that the studio has had to tackle over the past decade. So let's get into it. The first obstacle is entirely Pixar's fault, and that is that they themselves have set the bar, and they have set it extremely high. If you look at the first 15 years of its life, Pixar has put out the following 11 films: Toy Story, A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, and Toy Story 3. If you take out A Bug's Life and Cars, and you ask the average person on the street what their favorite animated movie ever is, I think it's safe to say one of those 9 would have at least a 50% chance of being their answer. Sure, you'd get a couple Lion Kings, Iron Giants, and either Spider-Verse as an answer, and if you ask most Letterboxd people, they would probably say Spirited Away, Fantastic Mr. Fox, or Mary and Max for the sad people. But the impact these 11 movies have had on an entire generation is impressive to say the least. Monsters Inc. alone is probably in my top 50 favorite movies of all time, and I don't know if I would pursue a career in filmmaking if I didn't watch Toy Story religiously when I was 4 years old. It made me want to keep playing new VHS tapes whenever I could get my hands on one, just so I could see what kind of world I could hop into next. But then if you look at the following 12 years, it's hard to not say this list sucks in comparison. Of course, films like Inside Out and Coco are definitely exceptions, and Soul's been my personal favorite of this next generation of Pixar, but besides that, you have a lot of meh movies in that pile. I think the point where somebody or something in the industry starts to lose their audience is after a release like Cars 2, whose only objective is to steal from a family that is living just above paycheck to paycheck and wants to treat their kids to a summer day at the movies. And somehow that movie gets released from a studio whose entire brand before was built on fully original stories that make you feel something. The trade of that short-term check costs you the long-term loyalty of a fan. And this isn't the first time Disney has gone through something like this. In fact, they've done it to many of their own studios, both in the past and present, and at this point, probably future. After the Renaissance age of their animation in the 90s, Disney had a streak of forgettable movies all throughout the 2000s. I mean, who the f took their kids to this one? Even the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going through something similar at the moment, and even though they still have a hit every once in a while, they aren't doing the consistent billion-dollar movies like they used to before Endgame, which is exactly what happens when you put out something like Star Wars 9: The Rise of Skywalker or Thor 4: Love and Thunder. When you ruin your brand with a release like this, the money made from that project might actually be the last amount of money made from that member of your audience. Most of my friends who are just casual movie fans usually tell me something along the lines of, yeah, I'm kind of done with Marvel actually, the last few have been pretty bad. And they say something similar when it comes to Star Wars. But somehow Pixar is in a much worse position than that, because those friends still probably know that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 just came out or Mandalorian just had Lizzo in it, but they couldn't tell you the name of the newest Pixar movie. When you set the bar at masterpiece level films like Toy Story, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, WALL-E, and Up, you have to maintain that level of quality to maintain your fans' money. In sports, when a player stops performing like they were in their prime, they fizzle out of the league. And Pixar seems to be on the verge of doing that. The kids that grew up with Toy Story might take their kids to Toy Story 5, but they're clearly choosing something fresh like Across the Spider-Verse over Elemental. Which leads us into point number 2. Sequels do ruin the original. Over the last decade, one of the biggest arguments against Hollywood is that there are too many sequels, remakes, reboots, prequels, spin-offs, whatever you want to pick. Defenders of this will say the original will never be ruined from a sequel or a remake. In some ways, I do agree with the remake part of that. I think for a story to remain timeless, it has to be retold in some sort of way consistently. That's how characters like Batman or James Bond become icons. And if you want to go really far back, it's how stories like Romeo and Juliet remain relevant today. It's just if something gets remade too soon, or if the original version feels timeless already, and then there's a remake that really isn't adding anything new or fresh to that story, it feels like a waste of time. Sequels, on the other hand, are a completely different beast. When you make a sequel, you are stripping away the imagination somebody has when a story finishes. After The Force Awakens came out, there is no longer the question of what would happen to Luke, Han, and Leia in Star Wars Episode 7 if they ever made one, because now that story is told. The argument from people defending this will be, who cares? You still have the originals, just forget about it and act like it doesn't exist. But to have the crazy thought that somebody who is a huge fan of one movie and then hates its sequel can just wipe that away from their memory forever is just an insane assumption to have. I don't have a problem with sequels, and one of them is the movie that made me fall in love with movies. Some of the best movies we've ever seen are sequels. And that's the thing, sequels aren't bad, but bad sequels are really bad. A lot of people out there will tell you they like Toy Story 2 more than the first one, and a lot of people will tell you they like Toy Story 3 more than 2, but I don't think you will find many people who say they prefer Monsters University, Finding Dory, or Incredibles 2 more than the first one. Pixar's spin-offs and sequels are following up some of the best movies ever made, and although most people will rush out to see them and they'll make $1 billion, most will walk away saying at best, I liked it, and they'll never talk about it again. If you're an executive at Disney, you probably chalk that up as a win. But when you compare it to the people walking out of Finding Nemo, gushing about how everybody in their family needs to go out to the theater and see it, it's really a long-term loss. Toy Story 3 didn't just make money because it was Toy Story 3. It made money because people couldn't stop crying at the ending, making everybody rush to the theater to see if Pixar was actually going to kill off a ton of toys in a kids movie. Now, I already see the comments saying, but Chase, bro, Toy Story 4 made even more money than Toy Story 3, so your argument is invalid. I like Toy Story 4, way more than I thought I ever would, and it did win the Best Animated Picture at the Oscars, but a good amount of people thought it was just fine, and I don't think many people consider it to be the best of the franchise. Great movies remain in the conversation years after it comes out. People still talk about 1 through 3 all the time, but even Toy Story 4 is kind of just fizzled out a little bit. And if Toy Story 5 comes out and it's the best in the franchise, yeah, it might beat number 4's box office numbers. But if people walk out saying anything less than, wow, this one's great, I think it could make less than $1 billion whenever it comes out. Because even though Lightyear wasn't exactly a Toy Story movie, it still barely made 1/5 of what Toy Story 4 made. At least Lightyear made money though, which is way more than the films that dropped straight onto. In 2020 happened. Theaters, like everything else, were shut down, and I was convinced the end of the normal movie-going experience was on the horizon. Studios like Warner Brothers had the genius idea of releasing their multiple hundreds of millions of dollar projects onto HBO Max the same day they would release in theaters, which I would say wasn't the brightest idea. So Disney saw this and said, let's do that with our Pixar movies, except let's not put them in theaters at all. Soul, Luca, and Turning Red were all dumped on a streaming platform when the creators thought their work was going to be on the big screen the entire time they were making it. I'm not even here to talk about the emotional reasons of why that isn't right. I'm here to talk about how a company who loves to make money decided to spend $150 million per movie and release it for free. Like, imagine giving away something for free without any return on that amount of money. The argument is that it brings in more subscribers, and that's what the shareholders care about. But without the word of mouth that comes from people going to the theater to see something, it makes these Pixar movies seem like they aren't worthy of watching, even though Soul and Turning Red totally are. Luca wasn't that good, guys, come on. I think these streaming services are great to help boost your IP, but that's just it. They are a boost, allowing you to rewatch a favorite movie or binge a spin-off show of something you already love, not a platform to premiere your films that are meant to have the quality of something you should be paying to go out and see. I think a great example of this was Disney's Encanto, which made just a little over $250 million worldwide and had an even lower opening weekend than Elemental. On paper, it wasn't a huge success, but as soon as it hit Disney Plus, all of those families who saw all the commercials to see it in theaters a couple months prior turned it on when it came to Disney Plus and immediately fell in love with it. Like I said, I live right by Disney World, and if you talk to anybody over there, the only new Disney related movie they love to talk about is Encanto, which is awesome because I do believe it's actually a really good movie, but I don't think the word of mouth would have been as strong if it dropped immediately on Disney Plus. I just think a lot of people would have felt it was unworthy of watching, whether they're aware of that or not. You don't want anything to feel like a Disney Channel movie when you put hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. And again, $250 million at the box office is better than $0 made at the box office. But in order to persuade somebody to get in their car, drive their family across town, and get each of them a ticket to the expensive theater is a hard feat to accomplish these days. And I believe Pixar's fourth obstacle is a large factor in that. Their originals don't feel original anymore. When people saw Toy Story in 1995, people had never seen anything like it. But we can chalk that up to the difference in animation styles at the time. It was films like Ratatouille, WALL-E, and Monsters, Inc. that brought people into worlds and stories that they felt like they could never dream up, let alone see on a big screen. It was films like Finding Nemo, Toy Story 3, and Up that would make the kids laugh every 90 seconds and have the adults crying heavily by the end credits, sometimes even by the end of the prologue. But since those days, the mainstream animation studios have stepped up their game in every possible way. Like, who would have thought the newest Puss in Boots movie would be widely regarded as one of the best films ever made? Even Disney Animation has stepped up their own game, putting out modern classics like Princess and the Frog, Frozen, Moana, and a few others that are still held in higher regard than most of Pixar's sequel slate. When it comes to all of the competition, Pixar just doesn't stand out nearly as much as they used to. Even Elemental, which I really like, looks half Inside Out, half Zootopia, which to the average person watching a trailer might give the feeling of, well, I feel like I've kind of seen this before. I don't think I have to go see this one. Their next film, Elio's, had its trailer play before Elemental, and while I didn't watch too much of it, what I saw just looked so basic. And if there was any word to describe Pixar in its prime, the last word I would pick is basic. And this is not to say Elio will be bad. It could come out and be my favorite film from the studio's entire history, but that doesn't matter. The battle is being lost in the marketing with all of these movies. Lightyear looked like a basic space movie. Onward looked like a basic fantasy movie. And Elemental just looked like a basic version of everything Pixar has done already. When you lose that sense of excitement from your fans, each new release that doesn't live up to the past library of films makes one more fan lose interest. And if you put enough of those disappointments out, you'll eventually be out of the game. And until that obstacle is overcome, Pixar will continue to live in its own dark age. I know I've been ripping on these movies for a whole video, but it's because I genuinely want to see this team get everything back on track. So then the question becomes, well, how do you fix it? I'm not naive to the point where I believe Pixar will never make a sequel again. So for starters, I would say choose the sequels carefully. If you were to go back and ask me 10 years ago if any Pixar movie deserved a sequel, I would have said The Incredibles. And we got Incredibles 2, which for me was a huge letdown since the story was nowhere near as powerful or interesting as the first. I don't think Inside Out 2 is a necessary movie at all. So make the story so compelling, so worth telling, that it makes me like it more than the original, just like Toy Story 2 for a lot of people. When it comes to original IP, make the creative worlds a staple in your movies again. I know the formula for this studio has become, well, what if this thing had feelings? things. And if we are sticking to that formula, make the things you pick interesting from both a story and visual perspective. The reason Monsters, Inc. is my current favorite Pixar movie is because everything is firing on all cylinders in that one. The characters are top tier, the story makes you feel something, but most of all, the world feels original and filled with attention to detail every frame of the movie. There's nothing else like it out there. And I know how hard it is to create something that feels new and fresh on a consistent basis. Trust me, it's tough. But that is the reason they were the best in the business as long as they were. They defined an entire generation of storytelling for so many of us. And at the end of the day, it is that storytelling that was and is the foundation of Pixar. And if they have done it before, I think they are very capable of doing it again, but they have to do it soon before it's too late. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had an absolute blast making this, and I'm so excited to be making YouTube content again. It's been a long time coming. I know it's been a while since I've made anything at all, and the longer I go without making videos, the more I realize how much this type of content means to me and how much I actually want to do it. I'm at a point in my life where I've just improved so much at making videos that I think it's the perfect time to hop back into this, essentially. So if you want to see everything else I'm up to, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. I have a video coming out on the DCEU that I want to talk about, along with Wes Anderson. They should both be coming out over the next week or so. If you made it to this part of the video, give this video a like for me. It just helps the algorithm. I want more people to see this video. And if you liked it, I hope other people see it too. Leave me a comment. What's your favorite Pixar movie? What Pixar movie lost you? You know, what's the one, once it came out, you're like, oh, Pixar has kind of lost it. For me, there's been a couple of those, but The Good Dinosaur, man, that was a low for me. So let me know what your pick for that is. And yeah, I hope you guys have an awesome day. Thanks.